Happy. I am now recording, and I am so happy that Stephen can tell us about his research today. So our speaker for today is Stephen Breunig. Yes, from the University of Southern Denmark. And Stephen seems to focus on a lot of different things, including English studies, communication studies, business communication, competence, literacy, cognitive linguistics, transdisciplinarity. And I've noticed that, Stephen, you also started working on social media and digitalization and language. And today you will be telling us about Sounding Professional, a case study of voice artists in Hollywood with an ESP perspective.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm going to try to share my slides now too. Yes. Okay. Yes. Yeah, I'm all over the place because I'm very much driven by my educational interests in helping students with their own educations. And whenever I see a need for something, I try to go in that direction, like digital competencies now, social media. And yeah, for my talk today, as Misha says, is sounding professional and from an ESP perspective. And this has to do with ESP stands for English for Specific Purposes. And that deals, ESP deals with different types of Englishes and different discourse communities like maritime English, airline English, English for medicine, and academic English as well. And yeah, let me just, oh, I'm not even showing my slides correctly yet. Sorry. Yeah, okay. And yes, my original training is in cognitive linguistics. So finding a way to talk about the things I'm looking for right now is kind of like working in the dark. I have a very good colleague in Odense, and I was sharing my enthusiasm for voice studies after I had been involved in the last two presentations in Aarhus, and I was explaining him, is it really like this? It's just air going up from the lungs through the larynx, and then sound comes out. This is so amazing because when we're taught, this we focus so much just on the articulatory uh, uh, part of the body, the mouth, and that's what you learn. And you don't look at lungs and the larynx that comes out. And then he gave me, and I talked about the phoneme P, and he said, yeah, and this is why, Stephen, there's a lot of debate about what we should actually call the phoneme P, because where is it actually articulated? Where's it coming from? And so so yeah, it's I looked in books. I have other books, references to find out what type of language. How do we talk about what we're interested in here? Um, and then I also have a very interest in practitioner-oriented approaches to research and work. And so I'm also interested in, well, okay, well, how do practitioners actually talk about voice? So I asked Jim Tasker, who is my voice artist, so do you use things like creepy voice, phonemes and stuff like that, prosody? And he said, no, in the business, they usually just given prompts. And I like to play for you what he means by that.
Because I get auditions that ask for like a 50s announcer, and 50s announcers are more, well, it's a little more like this. You're doing this and that and the other thing. Okay. Look at this film.
Yeah. And so I didn't get much help from my practitioner about how to talk about these things. But as I'm working, I'm getting more and more insight into notions of prosody, pitch, intonation, and the suprasegmental aspects of speech production. And so that's what I'm sort of looking at now.
Because I get auditions that ask for.
I don't know how to change my slides without. I'll go back. anyways, here is a voice artist, Jim Tasker from Hollywood, and he does all types of work. He does voiceovers for computer games, voiceover for film trailers, and he's also been the voice, if you're interested in American football, for the Super Bowl the last couple of years. And here you can listen to him to the Super Bowl.
CBS Sports welcomes you to the following special presentation of the National Football League, Super Bowl 55.
Yeah, and and he's got lots of other things he does too, but he's a professional user of voice, right? I mean, voice is his domain knowledge, you could say. Well, we as teachers, for example, we're more occupational users of voice. You know, we have our domain knowledge, and then we use voice to get our ideas across. Still, it's important also for teachers also to know how to use their voice. And you see, like opera singers and singers help teachers out, for example, in using their voice properly.
CBS Sports welcomes you to the.
I have to go out again. I don't know now. Okay. Yeah, anyways, just a little bit explanation about English for specific purposes is an applied linguistic field with a keen focus on language education. It looks into different contexts and focus on grammar, lexicon, and especially the genre, with a focus on first the needs of the learner. So it doesn't start off with some sort of a linguistic description of a grammar. No, it looks first and then teaches. It looks first, okay, what do we need for this person to do? And it covers many different areas, like I said, discourse communities, medical English, airline English. Call centers as well are also need training in English as well. Okay, but the challenge, I think, for a project like mine, as I'm learning, is, how do you connect prosody to pragmatics, the pragmatics of context? How do you connect that? I mean, can you see context in the prosody, in the way voice is used? And ESP sort of, has a problem with this, especially because much of their research begins with text, and they've only recently, because of new technologies, begun to move into spoken discourse, and that's sort of, I'm also finding it quite interesting too, to learn new technologies as well. My aims for right now are simply, to have a focus on how things are said and not so much what is said. And I'm interested in if we can actually connect how things are said with occupational identities. Does so it's not much, not the proposition itself, but how things are said. And can we actually see a difference between how airline pilots talk to medical doctors, to academics, and so on, and actually identify them by the prosody. I'm also interested, in how we use the voice to communicate emotions, mood, and attitudes as well, which is also very important. If you an airline pilot, you want to welcome your passengers, and you want to make them feel comfortable before they travel. So what did I do here? This is what I did. I prompted Jim with these occupational identities. I said, okay, here you're going to be talking as a doctor. And I gave him a text to read. And the text I gave him to read is like this. Welcome, please take a seat. Let us see what your medical records say. Colorless green ideas sleep furiously. This is normal, but we should be aware of any changes. And see you again in 2 months. Now, what I've done is I colored colorless green ideas sleep furiously, because this, as we know from Chomsky, he says it doesn't make any sense, right? Even though we can always find a context in which it does. But the point was here that I wanted to get away from the words and what they should mean, but just take a look at how Jim would use his voice when saying these things in this context. And then I wrote a text for each of the different occupational identities that I have here: airline pilots, academics, and a call center. Yeah, okay. But oops. What I want to do now is a little fun task. And I'm going to ask you to see if you can identify, just by listening to that one section, colorless green ideas, whether Jim is playing the role of a call center, an academic, an airline pilot, or a medical doctor. And I'll play them one at a time for you. Okay, and then you have to guess. And I'll go through them all first, and then we'll see how you do.
Colorless green ideas sleep furiously.
Oh, maybe turn up a little bit again.
Colorless green ideas sleep furiously.
Okay, that's the first.
Colorless green ideas sleep furiously. Colorless green ideas sleep furiously. Colorless green ideas sleep furiously.
You want to hear them again? Yes? Okay, we'll start with number one.
Colorless green ideas sleep furiously. Colorless green ideas sleep furiously. Colorless green ideas sleep furiously.
And the last.
Colorless green ideas sleep furiously.
Okay. Can you, I know it's difficult, a challenge, have any idea which of these would match with the occupational identity? Anybody have a guess for one? Which of these four? And you have to speak up because I can't see you right now.
Colorless green ideas sleep furiously.
So which one would that be, do you think?
So
Sorry.
Charlie.
I was just saying, I think it may be the academic.
The first one will be the academic. Yeah. Any other? Are we consensus on him? Yeah.
I see Paula. Paula wanted to speak.
I don't know. I thought that it could be airline pilot or medical doctor, because I think academic or call center could be 3 or 4. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And Misha, what was yours? I guess for.
Well, I was thinking at first, I thought, oh, is that their idea of what an academic speaks like? Which I wouldn't agree with, but I can imagine how some people might think that that's what an academic speaks like. But then I can see how people could also stereotypically quote a medical doctor as having a very monotonous.
Right. It's
voice.
very interesting that you're using the word stereotype here, because I'll get back to that later on, that you're saying that. But I think, Paul, I think you're in the ball field. It's the first one is the medical doctor.
Colorless green ideas sleep furiously.
And the second here is.
Colorless green ideas sleep furiously.
And I just, yeah. And then we have the academic.
Colorless green ideas sleep furiously.
That's the academic. That's it. And I think here we have, yeah, this is the.
Colorless green ideas sleep furiously.
Let me just move on to my next slide.
Colorless green ideas sleep.
I have to always go out. Okay. But I think it's interesting here then to show is I used the prod to put it in and to take a look at the pitched intonation, right? The medical doctor has a very low pitch. And maybe I should, right? And I think maybe we should listen to it in the context of the whole thing, because very interesting things going on that I don't have here.
Welcome. Please take a seat. Let's see what your medical records say. Colorless screen ideas sleep furiously. All right, this is normal, but we should be aware of any changes. See you again in 2 weeks.
Yes. I think it was interesting when trying to interpret how we can get to emotions with this. Was that it was very low and very serious. I think his expression of voice here, low intonation. But I also think that we need more context to help us identify, because it also might be what we might call like strategic pauses in his speech too. I'm going to move on to the next airline pilot. I'll just leave it like this, I think.
Welcome. Please fasten your seatbelts. The weather reports indicate that colorless green ideas sleep furiously. Our flight should be smooth, but we will inform you of any changes.
And I think here it's interesting, if we look into pitch and intonation, we get a higher pitch level. Not too much variation though in the pitch. And I think it's interesting when we compare it to the call center, which we'll get to as well. But look at the academic. I think it's really interesting for us who teach how high the pitch level is right here, and maybe much too high for our own good. You know, I'll play the whole context.
Welcome to class. You can begin by looking at any questions. The objective today is that colorless green ideas sleep furiously. The exercises for today are here on this guide, but you can find them also online.
Yes, I think this is quite interesting how high it is, and not too much variation, but just really high. And then okay, how do we interpret the emotions? It's maybe a lot of excitement there, enthusiasm, I think, trying to show by that. But then the call center is also quite interesting. It's more in the middle, and there is, in comparison to the other voices that Jim uses, there seems to be more variation in the pitch. And maybe that is what gives it a sense more of friendliness and service. Maybe.
Thank you for calling. We would like to assist you. The product you bought says, colorless green ideas sleep furiously. The product is safe to use, but it should be used outdoors. Enjoy the product.
Yeah, and yeah, and it is. I think it is hard maybe to identify just by that one utterance that I gave, but I think in more context, I think it starts to make sense. And I think Misha is onto something about the stereotypical aspects of it. Yeah, and really that's about really as far as I'm going, just comparing these different voices and trying to interpret them and towards what type of emotions, and maybe why those are emotions we associate maybe stereotypically with the different occupational identities. But I think maybe it's not always too stereotypical either. I do want to show you the parts of the interview that I did with Jim Tasker, because I think it's interesting what he says here about the different occupational identities, or about the connection of voice and context, and how we use it intentionally to get meanings across. I'll play the first video clip about just voice to use for communication.
You have to draw from experiences and stuff like that to do that. Vocationally, it's probably better to just understand that you know, certain techniques help listeners and help you deliver.
Right.
That certainly is true with voice acting, but it's also true in any job, you know. Even like voices that come from, you know, up here and, you know, whatever, and not below, are I mean, that's something that you know, the world needs, the world has, and also is on voiceovers as well in professional. Yeah. It's whatever it calls for. But you know, I've always been taught that to gain someone's attention,
Yeah.
it's generally comes from lower. You know what I mean? From a very intense, sort of, this is, you need to listen to me here, okay? Because as I go closer to the microphone,
Yeah.
you want to listen to it a little bit better. Okay, you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I get it. Yeah. Okay, so I think it's telling us, conveying to us, how we can actually, use voice intentionally to communicate certain things over to listen, and we can be quite aware of this, and it's not only for voice actors as well, but any other occupational users of voice as well. But to connect this with the context, I also think it is as if we do have a type of cognitive schemas about context when we are using our voice. And I think this comes quite well across here in this, he says here.
You have to draw from experiences and stuff.
Wrong one.
Calling for this. Well, this person's reading in a big room. So you have to like picture it in your mind. This is what it is. There's a bunch of students, behind me, and I have to speak like I'm talking in a big auditorium, and this is what we're doing now, and later we're going to do this. So it's one of those things where you have to like picture it, as far as voice acting, and then go into it knowing where this voice is going. What room you're in, who's going to be listening, stuff like that. So.
Yeah, and the way I interpret what he's saying here now is that when we speak, we're very much aware of content, and that does seem to play into the idea that we can actually see or actually hear context in how we say things. But just some final reflections. I think it's quite amazing how our bodies produce this speech and voice, and how some phonological distinctions in one language are prosody in another, right? And we have the big case we heard last week, with the Danish st sound. It means you have to say a difference between girl and dog, hun and hun. You get the creepy voice use there. Voice as an expression of emotion, and I write, yes, I think that it's through our communities of practice we learn how to use our voice to express certain emotions and attitudes. But I think the mapping between voice qualities and occupational identities is problematic. So we can't always make it direct, because we do need to look at the local context, and there is occupational identities are constructed to a certain degree as social identities are. And also, as Misha said earlier, professional identity emerges from inventory of shared myths and stereotypes to help create a professional identity and project it to others. So we are playing against stereotypical notions of what occupational identity has, and even as teachers, and airline pilots and doctors and so on. But for ESP, I think that they might consider the idea there is close mapping between voice quality and occupational identities, while keeping these other things in mind as well. So they would also need to move beyond their texts and language, and also to teach about cultural values, attitudes, stereotypes, and so on. Yeah. Well, that was about all I had for today. So I'm, hopefully you found some interesting data here. And if you have any questions, yeah, let's talk a little bit about these things.